So when the iPad 10 was presented, I thought it was really interesting. I immediately ordered it, I got it at launch, I reviewed it, and I liked it. But I still ended up selling it, and it's probably not what you think. Let's ramble.
Hold up, place go wild when I pull up. They all on me like it once.
Hey, what is up guys? It's great to see you all again, and if you're new here, I'm Patrick, and this is where I ramble about tech and other stuff. So as you probably remember, Apple did not hold an October event last year. Instead, it chose to release their updated devices via a series of press releases, and in hindsight, it's hard to blame them. The M2 iPad Pro was an incremental upgrade at best, so much so that I dedicated an entire video explaining why I'm not reviewing it. I won't bore you with the details right now, I've said my piece. If you want to hear me rant, there's a link at the end of this video. The other release was yet another rendition of the Apple TV, which, it is what it is. So really, the only device I was interested in reviewing was the iPad 10. Normally, I wouldn't get too excited about the entry-level iPad, and in the past, I've only reviewed it in comparison videos, never on its own. However, this iPad 10 had a couple of new features that were interesting enough for me to want to check them out, like the front-facing camera in landscape mode, and like the brand new keyboard with a row of function keys that had been painfully absent from the Magic Keyboards for the iPad Pro and Air. I decided to go for the yellow iPad, which in person actually looks more like gold than yellow, but anyway, it was a fresh new color and I like it. Oh yeah, it also came with a new braided cable, which might not be a big deal, but I really like little details like that. Now, the first thing that stood out was the fact that the iPad 10 looks almost identical to the iPad Air 5, at least at first sight. No more hideous thick bezels, and the chassis now shares the sharp edges and the boxy design with all the other iPads, making the transition to that look complete. The only difference with the iPad Air that were visible on the outside were of course the much better front-facing camera placement, which has now finally moved to the long side to be used in landscape mode so we can make video calls like a normal person. And then there's the smart connector dots that moved from the back to the bottom, and I will get back to that later. Unfortunately, there is also a third physical difference with the iPad Air that becomes visible as soon as you turn the iPad on, and that is the fact that the iPad still doesn't have a laminated display. If you don't know, most iPads these days have laminated displays, which basically means that the display sits against the glass of the iPad, there's no air or no gaps in between, which gives you that feeling of literally touching the display. A non-laminated display, like the one on this iPad 10, does have that gap between the glass and the actual display, and it's noticeable. The display doesn't look as good because of it, and you will get noticeably more glare. In most other ways, the display is pretty much the same. It has 500 nits of brightness, which is fine for indoor use, but yeah, I wish it was laminated because it looks quite dated. Now, I know there's an advantage to non-laminated displays, and that is that it's much easier to replace the glass screen when it's broken, and that can make sense on an entry-level iPad since these tend to be the ones mostly used in schools, etc. But purely as a consumer, I'm not a fan. It also feels weird, especially when using the Apple Pencil, because it actually feels like you're writing on glass, even more so than it would do on a laminated display. Thankfully, you can remedy that to a large extent by applying a Paperlike screen protector. And thank you very much, Paperlike, for kindly sponsoring this video. If you've been to this channel before, you've heard me mention Paperlike probably more than once, and that's because it's the first thing I do when I order a new iPad. I slap on a Paperlike. The difference in handwriting without a Paperlike and with a Paperlike is really night and day. There's so much more resistance to the Apple Pencil, which eliminates that annoying feeling of writing on glass, and it even helps my handwriting look a little better. I've also had a lot of digital artists comment that it makes the drawing experience much better. And of course, it protects your screen from scratches, which is great, but if I'm being totally honest, I might like the fact that it actually prevents fingerprints even more. The only gripe some people used to have with Paperlike is that it could make your green look a bit dull, a bit grainy if you will. But that's what I like so much about Paperlike, because they listened to us, went back to the drawing board, and came out with a new and improved version that looks much better and has tremendously reduced the grain. You can barely tell it's on there now. Every order comes with 2 Paperlikes and application accessories. They offer worldwide shipping, so if you want to try it out for yourself, there's a link in the description. Anyway, That does bring me to the first gripe I have with the iPad 10. I mean, apart from the not so great display, of course, and that is the fact that it still uses the first generation Apple Pencil. Now, in my initial review, I was poking fun a little bit at the fact that Apple not only stuck us with this grossly outdated pencil, instead of just making it compatible with the Gen 2 Apple Pencil, they even made us pay for that ridiculous adapter it requires because the iPad 10 comes with a USB-C port. Finally, I might add. But Apple obviously didn't feel like developing a new Apple Pencil with a USB-C charger, so now we got an adapter instead, and we got to pay extra for it. Thanks, Tim. Now, later I realized that there's actually a valid reason why Apple didn't include the second gen Apple Pencil, which has to do with the placement of the front-facing camera. It has now finally moved to landscape orientation where it belongs. We've been asking for this for years, and I was really happy to see this. But that does of course mean that it sits right where the magnetic charging module would be for the Gen 2 Apple Pencil, and that is most likely the reason why Apple stuck us with a Gen 1 instead. And that's also most likely why the M2 iPad Pro still has the camera in that annoying portrait orientation, because Apple simply hasn't found an adequate solution for the Apple Pencil yet. I really hope they will come up with something soon. I mean, Samsung found a solution. Granted, it's not a very elegant one, but at least they're trying. Now, before we move on to my second and probably biggest gripe with the iPad 10, there's another positive upgrade from the 9 to the 10, and that is the fact that we now have stereo speakers on opposite sides. Especially when watching videos or gaming, this is a good improvement. I did do a little sound test during my initial review, so let's have a quick listen just for reference. So yeah, definitely an improvement there. Now, moving on to my biggest gripe with this iPad, and that is the new Magic Keyboard Folio and how it affects my workflow. I mentioned earlier that the smart connector dots have moved from the back to the bottom of the iPad, and that is to accommodate the new keyboard, which now snaps onto the bottom and comes with a separate back part with a kickstand. So let me give you a couple of things I like about it first. What I love about this keyboard is that it finally has a row of function keys. I wish the iPad Pro's Magic Keyboard would have this, but the design simply will not allow it, as it would be very awkwardly positioned below the screen and you would keep hitting the bottom of the iPad with your fingers. We've seen some patents filed by Apple of a redesigned keyboard with more and higher viewing angles, so if something like that materializes, I can see the function keys coming to the Magic Keyboard as well. Fingers crossed. By the way, the patent also shows a dedicated charging space for the Apple Pencil inside the hinge of the keyboard. So that could be part of the solution we actually need to get that camera onto the side bezel. The second thing I actually like about this keyboard is the fact that it comes in two parts, meaning I can keep the back part attached semi-permanently and use it as a kickstand. But that is also what I don't like about this keyboard. I'll explain. What I like about the Magic Keyboard is the weight distribution. While the viewing angles are limited and a bit awkward at times, Apple managed to really nail the weight distribution on this thing, which means it is perfect for use on your lap, aka perfect lapability. However, I strongly dislike this type of keyboard with a kickstand because it never sits right on your lap. The Microsoft Surface, the Samsung S8 Ultra, they all have it, and it just doesn't work on your lap. And that means I'll need a desk to type comfortably, and that kind of defeats the purpose of having a tablet for me. And if you think you can attach this to a Magic Keyboard since it has the same shape as the iPad Air, think again, because the fact that the smart connectors move to the bottom make it incompatible with the Magic Keyboard. Another major issue with the keyboard is that it doesn't support pass-through charging. With the Magic Keyboard, I can use the USB-C port on the Magic Keyboard to charge my iPad Pro, leaving the iPad's own USB port open for hubs, adapters, and other useful things. The iPad 10 does not support that, so if you're using the USB-C port for attachments, you have no choice but to watch your battery drain fast. Now, I can't do this video without talking about the price, because that is where I think this iPad becomes really awkward. The major selling point of the entry-level iPad has always been its relatively low price point at $329. This new iPad starts at $449, which is quite a steep increase, especially if you want to add the Magic Keyboard Folio, which at $249 is only $50 cheaper than the actual Magic Keyboard. The new price point also puts it really close to the iPad iPad Air, which is $150 more. But you'll get the M1 chip, a better and laminated display, better camera on the back, compatibility with the 2nd gen Apple Pencil, and the Magic Keyboard. So if I'm being honest, I have a very hard time recommending the iPad 10 to anyone really. Now, my personal reason for selling the iPad is stupidly decadent, and please believe me when I tell you I would 100% not have this issue if I didn't have a tech review channel, but the reason why I sold it is this. For anything work related that requires a keyboard, I still prefer the iPad Pro, even if that means having the camera at that awkward angle. For casual use, I found myself grabbing my iPad mini 100% of the time. You regulars know I absolutely love the iPad mini and I use it every single day without fail. So that means that if I don't use it for work and I don't use it casually, the iPad 10 was quickly becoming a very expensive paperweight, one that I certainly couldn't justify keeping any longer, so I sold it, so that I could put that money back into the budget to invest in new tech to review for you guys in the near future. And please do subscribe if you're interested in seeing more reviews. That would be much appreciated. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please get one of these. It really does help the channel. Thank you so much for watching and see you in the next one.